Today, we're diving into the story of a secret police force that was so powerful, so feared, that its own strength ended up being the very thing that brought it all crashing down. This is the incredible story of SAVAK.
Take a look at this place. This is Evin Prison in Tehran. Now, for years, this wasn't just a jail. Oh no. It was a symbol of absolute, terrifying power. This was the dark heart of an organization known as SAVAK, the Shah of Iran's secret police. And that brings us to the central puzzle, the big question we're tackling. By the mid-70s, SAVAK seemed completely untouchable. I mean, it was the iron foundation of the Shah's entire regime. But then, just a few short years later, both SAVAK and the Shah were gone. So, what happened? How on earth did an instrument of total control end up sparking a full-blown revolution? To really get our heads around this paradox, we need to rewind the clock. Let's go back to the mid-1970s, right when SAVAK was at the absolute peak of its power. So, what exactly was SAVAK? Well, the full name is a mouthful. Sazman Etela'at va Emniyat e Keshvar. It basically means the Organization of Intelligence and National Security. This was the Shah's personal spy agency, his secret police, his everything. And here's the key part. It wasn't accountable to anyone else. No courts, no parliament. It answered only to the Shah. It was his all-seeing eye.
You know, if you were looking at Iran from the outside back then, it looked pretty good. Oil money was flowing, the country seemed stable and strong. But that stability, it was a total illusion, and it was held together by one thing: fear. And the architect of that fear was SAVAK. Beneath that shiny surface, it was the most hated institution in the entire country.
An organization this extreme doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? SAVAK wasn't born in a vacuum. It was very much a product of its time, forged in the fires of the Cold War. You have to remember, the Middle East back then was a real powder keg. SAVAK was created in 1957, and that's just 4 years after a CIA-backed coup had kicked out Iran's prime minister and put the Shah back on the throne with basically absolute power.
So you've got to understand the Shah's mindset. He was terrified of being challenged again. He needed a tool, an organization that could absolutely crush any threat, whether it came from nationalists, the very popular Communist Tudeh Party, or anyone else. And of course, this fit perfectly with America's big goal of keeping Iran away from the Soviet Union. And he wasn't building this thing alone, not by a long shot. The Shah's allies in the West, especially the US and Israel, were crucial. The CIA actually helped design SAVAK's structure, and Israel's Mossad trained its first officers. So from day one, SAVAK was learning from the best, or the most ruthless, depending on how you look at it. Okay, so with that kind of powerful international backing, SAVAK grew into this monster that seeped into every single corner of Iranian life, creating this suffocating, all-encompassing culture of fear. Just think about the numbers here. SAVAK had about 6,000 full-time officers, which is a lot, but it's real power. That came from a massive, shadowy network of tens of thousands of informants. Your neighbor, your professor, the guy who served you tea, anyone could be watching. They were everywhere. And what could they do? Basically anything they wanted. They operated completely outside the law. Arrest anyone, anytime, for any reason? Yup. Hold them indefinitely without a trial? You bet. They controlled everything people read, everything they said. There was no escape. And behind the closed doors of places like Evin Prison, the methods were just brutal. SAVAK became infamous all over the world for torture. It got so bad that international human rights groups were constantly calling them out, and it really started to tarnish the Shah's reputation on the world stage. And this right here is where the whole story flips on its head, because all of that power, all of that brutal, terrifying efficiency, it didn't actually make the regime safer. In fact, it's what planted the seeds of its own spectacular collapse. It all backfired in 3 major ways. First, by crushing any kind of peaceful protest, it basically left people with only one option: violent revolution. Second, it created a common enemy. You had leftists, liberals, and religious conservatives who agreed on literally nothing, except that they all hated SAVAK. And finally, it just destroyed any legitimacy the Shah had, both at home and around the world. It boils down to this simple, brutal logic. When you make any kind of criticism a crime that could get you tortured and thrown in a cell forever, you don't actually stop people from disagreeing with you. You just convince them that the only way to make a change is to burn the whole system down. So the stage was completely set. You've got this entire population united against the regime, an opposition that has no peaceful way to express itself, and an international community that's getting more and more uncomfortable. The whole thing was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And that spark, funnily enough, came from the White House. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter started leaning on the Shah about human rights. So the Shah, trying to keep his most important ally happy, told SAVAK to ease up a little. But instead of being grateful, people saw it as a sign of weakness. The fears started to break, and suddenly people were pouring into the streets. See, SAVAK had been so good at crushing all the secular political groups, but they totally underestimated the power of the mosques and the religious networks. This created a huge power vacuum, and there was one man, the exiled Ayatollah Khomeini, ready to fill it. His message got spread on smuggled cassette tapes, completely bypassing the government censorship, and he became the leader of this massive, unstoppable revolutionary wave. By late 1978, the game was up. The organization that was built on fear was now facing a population that wasn't afraid anymore. Its own officers started deserting, and in February 1979, the Shah fled, Khomeini returned, and SAVAK was officially dissolved. Just like that, its reign of terror was over. But did the methods of SAVAK die with the organization? Well, this is where the story takes its final and maybe its most tragic twist. Just look at this comparison. It's pretty chilling. The new revolutionary government publicly screamed about how evil SAVAK was. But as soon as they got into power, they created their own security forces. And while the goal was different, protecting the Islamic Republic instead of the monarchy, the methods started to look disturbingly familiar. New groups like the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, became the new enforcers. The basic idea of a powerful, shadowy internal security force that protects the state from its own people, that didn't go away. It's like the name on the jersey changed, but the playbook stayed pretty much the same. So what's the big takeaway from all this? The ultimate lesson from SAVAK is that a regime built only on fear is actually incredibly fragile. Its power is an illusion. The very tools it uses for control are the things that end up radicalizing its enemies, uniting them, and destroying its own right to exist. And that leaves us with a really big question for today. How many other powerful, seemingly stable regimes out there are making that exact same mistake right now?